Have you ever heard of the phrase, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Well, today, I found a great example as to why that rule is so important, and also why I live by it to this day. Hello everybody, my name is Colonel Fish, and welcome back to the cold side of your pillow. And get comfy, because today we're talking about Coke. Now, I'm not talking about that sweet booger sugar, which you definitely shouldn't do because drugs are bad. No, I'm talking about Coca-Cola, specifically New Coke. But to understand what New Coke is, we need to understand the history of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was founded in 1888 in Atlanta, Georgia by a man named John Pemberton. He was an American Civil War veteran who, after suffering injuries in the war, got addicted to morphine. Fun times. The name refers to the two main ingredients, coca leaves, which is unprocessed cocaine, and cola nuts, which is caffeine. He had invented the drink to cure a whole host of symptoms, such as headaches, opioid addiction, and alcoholism. He also marketed it as a temperance drink, which is also known as a non-alcoholic, which is also known as a very unfun beer. It made its way to soda fountains by the middle of 1886, with 3 different companies selling their own versions of it at the time. The companies were Walker, Dozier, and Pemberton's Coca-Cola Company. Pemberton told Walker and Dozier that they can continue to manufacture the drink with 1/3 share of the formula each, but he wanted his son Charlie to have full rights over the name Coca-Cola. This kind of sucked for a local businessman named Asa Chandler because he was a partner of Walker and he wanted to have the name of Coca-Cola for himself. When John Pemberton died suddenly in 1888 and old Charlie became addicted to opioids, Asa Chandler swooped in to buy the company name. And the story went like this.
Hey, Mrs. Pemberton. So sorry for your loss. Like $300, would that do it?
He immediately founded a new separate company called the Coca-Cola Company and completely abandoned the original one. By 1892, he had completely reinvented the company as his own, and 2 years later, Charlie was found unconscious with a stick of opium by his side. His only friend, opium, there till the end. Following Charlie's passing, Asa began to make big strides in the growth of his company. He led a bottling company out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, began to bottle Coca-Cola, who subcontracted work out to product fucking distribution companies. Oh my god. Distributor. Following Charlie's passing, Asa began to make big strides in the growth of his company. He led a bottling company out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, began to bottle Coca-Cola, who would then sell it to the distributors, who would put it in stores that you and I would buy it from. This became the organization of the company for years to come. You see, the only thing Coca-Cola really does is make the Coca-Cola syrup. They don't actually make the drink as you buy it in the store. Coca-Cola Company makes and sells the cola syrup to the bottlers, and the bottlers sell it to the distributors, and the distributors put it in the stores. This is how the company still works today. Between 1890 and 1903, Asa decided to slowly decrease and eventually stop using fresh coca leaves to cut down the amount of cocaine used in the drink, removing all the fun. By 1892, Asa was using 1/10 the amount of coca leaves Pemberton's original formula called for, and by 1903, they were using what's called spent leaves that were left over after the cocaine extraction process. Asa ran the company until late 1919, when a group of investors led by a man called Ernest Woodruff bought the company. After buying the company for $25 million, Ernest reincorporated and publicly offered 500,000 shares at $40 a share. Shortly after acquiring the company, Robert Woodruff, Ernest's son, was elected as president of the company. He wasted no time in making strides, and he came up with the idea of selling their glass bottled drinks in 6-packs, making it easier for people to buy the drink and keep it in their house. Robert made the switch to a cocaine-free coca leaf extract in 1929, effectively removing all cocaine from Coca-Cola. Not long after this, Robert expanded the company worldwide, and by the late 1940s, they owned around 60% of the entire world's beverage market. Under Robert's management, Coca-Cola graced 100 countries on 7 continents, and the biggest contributor to the success was the company's marketing. With an easily recognizable logo and an even more recognizable red packaging, Coke became the centerpiece of the American lexicon. Like, seriously, look at this picture. What do you think it is? Probably Coke. The idea of cola sodas were inadvertently invented by Coke because other companies would literally try to just copy Coke with their own cola drink. The span and influence of the company was universal, and with distributors all across the world, it was harder to find a place where they didn't have Coke at all. Coca-Cola as we know it today is the exact same as it was 140 years ago. This is because they always held themselves to their original 1888 secret formula. It seemed like the formula was written by God on a stone tablet, and it meant a lot to people as their reputation grew. Changing it would be like revising the Bible, a big no-no, as we'll see later in this video. The secret formula gave Coke something nobody else had: generational consistency. They leveraged that idea of a universal standard for what Coke is, and it never changed. People really loved it for that reason. It was always the real thing. Bam! It's the fucking 80s. Under Pressure just came out. The first documented case of HIV/AIDS was reported in the United States, and people are doing real cocaine. It was a great time, but not for Coca-Cola. Coke is getting into a sticky situation where people are starting to like Pepsi more than Coke, and people were finally figuring out that drinking sodas all the time maybe wasn't that good for you. It didn't really help that the new generation of soda drinkers seemed to like Pepsi more anyway. Pepsi knew this, and they continued to run ads about how this drink was chosen by the new generation, and the proposition loomed over Coke as they watched their market share dwindle to about 24%. At the time, Coke still had 2 things going for it. It had a chokehold on restaurants and vending machines, and at this point it had held to its secret formula for almost 100 years. The problem was, Pepsi was catching up, and if the market continued the way it was going, they knew they wouldn't retain their lead much longer. That's when, at the worst possible time, Roberto Goizueta, a longtime employee, was promoted to CEO and chairman of the board of directors of Coca-Cola. Goizueta had a long history and a decent reputation with the company. In the 50s, he originally became the head of a Coke plant in Cuba, but had to defect to the United States during Castro's rise to power. Over the next 3 decades, he slowly climbed the corporate ladder, and eventually he was promoted to CEO. By 1984, Coca-Cola's market share in beverages had fallen to around 20%. A lack of ambition from Coke had led to other companies taking initiative and creating new and unique sodas that slowly divided up soda drinkers as a market, and as a result, Coke's market share fell. And it was clear Coke needed to do something to retain their market share. The first thing Goizueta said was that there were to be no more sacred cows. So, with that sentiment, he released Cherry Coke and Diet Coke.
A great new taste from Coca-Cola. New Cherry Coke. It's out and outrageous.
This was the first time in Coca-Cola's history where they sold something other than just original Coke. Even though Cherry Coke is literally my favorite soda, and the fact that both of these new drinks were relatively popular, Pepsi was still kicking Coke's ass. This made Goizueta panic, especially when he saw the Pepsi ad campaign called the Pepsi Challenge. The Pepsi Challenge consisted of consumers doing a blind taste test of Coke and Pepsi, and it seemed to show that people liked Pepsi more.
My volunteer firemen friends here have volunteered to take the Pepsi Challenge. Okay, now I want you to tell me which one you chose. Pepsi Cola!
Although this wasn't very scientific, it did seem to convince a lot of people. Goizueta felt like he had to do something revolutionary to take back the attention from Pepsi, so he had a great idea. In the wake of the Pepsi challenge, Goizueta decided they would try to outdo Pepsi, so they put into place something called Operation Kansas. Company experts and scientists were hired to create a better version of Coke that would beat Pepsi and even original Coke in a taste test consistently. After they finally created what they thought was a perfect formula, they had an important decision to make. Should we release it as a side project? Or should we replace Coca-Cola's nearly century-old flagship product with a new product that hasn't been QA tested at all? Roberto ended up replacing Coke like a fucking madman. He felt confident in his decision because years earlier, he had actually tweaked and fucked with the formula and the Coca-Cola of his own Coca-Cola plant in Cuba and found that it actually increased sales by a small percentage, so he felt emboldened to do so. But before he released it to the public, he wanted to get the blessing of his predecessor, Robert Woodruff. Woodruff, however, wouldn't get to share his thoughts because he would die literally a month before it released in March of 1985. With no more spiritual predecessors alive for him to ask the blessing of, he decided to move forward with his invention. He called it New Coke. Literally a month after Robert Woodruff dies, on April 23, 1985, Goizueta drops New Coke, and almost instantaneously, they didn't get the reception they were hoping for. People didn't like it, but Goizueta held out hope. He insisted on his creation, and he even drank it until he died. So I know what you're thinking. So what was it like, you know? You haven't really, said anything about the taste or anything like that? Did it taste good? I mean, if it was good, I probably would have liked it. No, it wasn't that good. It was boring as shit. I've asked my father about this because he was a kid when New Coke came out, and he's described it as watered down Pepsi, which sounds horrific. And other people online who have said they've tried it said it tastes like 80% Pepsi, 20% Coke. So yeah, not revolutionary, not anything special. No. Coca-Cola has always been known to mostly operate in or around Atlanta, Georgia. This is important because it was a pillar of Southern culture, and when the rich white men up in New York took away their Coca-Cola, it didn't just make them mad, it made them pisseder than hell.
But public reaction was immediate and negative.
All of the taste tests said people preferred the taste of this new product to the century-old product. What they hadn't factored in was the huge emotional attachment there was to this brand.
It felt like the Yankees were just stripping away another aspect of their Southern heritage, and they took it as abject betrayal. Angry Southerners flooded Coca-Cola support hotlines and bombarded the headquarters of Coke with 40,000 angry letters. This was before public email, so nobody emailed them. Not long after the Southern Revolt, the entire country began to dislike it. People who drank it were ostracized by their own families. It was a big deal. Shame discouraged most consumers from embracing New Coke. It had simply become fun to hate. No son of mine is gonna be drinking that New Coke gay shit. Within weeks, a Coke run began to pick up speed, and they called it a Coke run because it's a bank run, but for Coca-Cola. People were lining up to pick up the last supplies of the old drink in any bar or restaurant they could find, leading people to scour even rural areas for the last of the supply. And when that ran out, they started smuggling it from the southern border, like the other kind of Coke. Organizations and clubs started popping up where they sold anti-New Coke merch and would spam the hotlines with continuous complaints. This effectively undid all the branding and marketing and commercials for New Coke, including commercials with Bill Cosby. Yes, Bill Cosby did Coke commercials.
Bacon cheeseburger, medium rare, lettuce, tomato, onion, and ketchup. Big ice cold frosty Coca-Cola next to it. Look at that, huh? Perfectoness. This is real refreshment, real big taste. Now see, if you were another cola, number 2 or number 29, you'd do taste tests and challenges and stuff and try and compare yourself to this, wouldn't you? Sure, don't shake your head now. You would too, you sneaky devil. See, that's why they call this the real thing. Yes, it is. Coca-Cola is it. Coke is it.
Even though they still tried to salvage it, people absolutely hated New Coke. An Alabama reporter would go on to say that since Goizueto was from Cuba, that it was a communist ploy to attack and damage American businesses like Coca-Cola. But then it was revealed that Castro, being an avid drinker of original Coke, called New Coke, quote, a sign of capitalist decadence. Even Goizueto's own father would come out to say that it was one of the only times that he agreed with Castro, which is fucking hilarious. Distributors were threatening to pull out. Foreign markets didn't want any part of the catastrophe, and Pepsi was making banger commercials about how Coke went and changed on us, which reflected the growing sentiment of the country.
They changed my Coke.
Something wrong with it?
I know, they sure changed it.
Coulda asked.
What coulda? I stuck with them through 3 wars and a couple of dust storms, but this is too much. Guess something big made them change.
Right, big.
Right, big.
Introducing the great new taste of Coca-Cola. The best tasting Coke in the history of ever.
It's a hit. It's a Coke. Coke is it.
It's Coca-Cola with a new taste, a new sensation, a new explosion of wonderfulness in your mouth. Go ahead, try it.
Bill Cosby ended up parting ways with Coke because he said it hurt his reputation, although it wouldn't really matter in the coming decades for him. Eventually, they realized there was no way out and bent to the will of the people. On July 11th, 1985, not even 3 months after New Coke was released, Coca-Cola announced the addition of Coca-Cola Classic to its roster, which was just the original formula, the way everybody wanted it. The right of choice had been returned. Even with the return of original Coke, they kept selling New Coke as if it was the flagship product, but culturally there was nothing they could do to keep New Coke in the spotlight. They renamed it Coke 2 in 1990 to try and revamp it, but eventually in 2002 they stopped making it altogether. So, New Coke had finally been defeated. Nationwide euphoria. The people had finally won. In a crazy twist of irony, after Coca-Cola Classic was introduced, they saw record growth in sales even higher than where they were before New Coke was released. So in a way, it had done its job. New Coke did revive the brand, but it only worked because people realized how much they missed regular Coke, so they held onto it a little tighter after it was given back to them. Coke was being sold twice as fast as Pepsi after it was restored. Coke's sales shot up, and they hold around 45% of the beverage market today, almost double as much as they did in 1985. Although we had our Coke back the way we wanted it, this was during a time where most products in the United States began switching from cane sugar to high fructose corn syrup, and people speculated as to whether or not Coke Classic was even original Coke to begin with, but most people at the time didn't care. I would venture to guess either you or somebody that you know can't tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi, and that's for good reason, because they don't fucking taste that different. I do not care what you Coke suckers and Pepsi puffers think about your fucking soft drink. They taste the same. Period. End of discussion. For most people, whether they knew it or not, it wasn't the taste that made Coke, Coke. Even the guy that started the anti-New Coke organization couldn't tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi in a blind taste test. It's about the idea of original Coke. The problem wasn't entirely the taste, The problem was partly because it wasn't the real thing, and that scared people. They felt like something sacred was being rewritten and taken from them right before their eyes. The important lesson Coke and the entire business world learned was simple. If you have something that isn't all fucked up, maybe don't fuck it up. You know, that would help. All right, today's song of the day is going to be Shake It On by Jamiroquai. I'm going to have their song linked into the description with Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube video link in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed learning way too much about Coca-Cola. Thank you guys for watching this video tonight. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, or don't. I don't care. I do this shit for fun, not for the money. As always, stop playing with your food, don't put your IRA in gold and silver, and never, ever take gas station boner pills. Have a good night. Skill, brother.